Science is awesome. We've smashed atoms, landed on comets, and even sent robots to Mars. But for every genius breakthrough, there's a theory that once said coffee makes you see dead people, junk food can end obesity, or that pixie dust could regrow lost limbs. They all eventually ended with a red-faced, yeah, about that. But before we get started, as always, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe using that notification bell so you don't miss out on any new content. I'm Mike with List 25, and these are 25 times science evolved and proved itself wrong. 25. Too much coffee makes you see dead people. In 2009, a British tabloid called the Daily Express ran a headline that made coffee sound like a horror movie. They said scientists found that 7 cups of coffee a day could make you hallucinate and see dead people. The paper leaned hard into the ghost angle, and even the BBC ran with it, saying coffee drinkers were 3 times more likely to hallucinate. But the research behind it was shaky. Ben Goldacre, who writes the Bad Science blog, pointed out that the study only counted about 200 people and that it never got peer-reviewed. Worse, their idea of hallucinations also included normal stuff like daydreaming or hearing background noises while you're at work. In the end, it only proved how easily caffeine can fuel bad science, not to mention terrible reporting. 24. Make women happier. In 2012, science accidentally handed frat boys the ultimate incorrect pickup line. A survey of 293 women suggested that semen had antidepressant properties, and news outlets quickly ran with the headline, "Blowjobs make women happier." The original research never even mentioned oral sex, but that didn't stop the story from spreading and giving men everywhere something to talk about. The excitement didn't last, and follow-up reports quickly dismantled the claim. The study had actually looked at unprotected intercourse, not oral sex. Women who had had unprotected sex showed slightly higher happiness scores, but there were plenty of other explanations that didn't involve, well, you know. Even the lead researcher clarified that the results were, quote, largely correlation, and said any real test would require the kind of testing that no ethics board would approve. 23. Chocolate can help you win a Nobel Prize. Everyone loves chocolate, and who doesn't like the idea of getting smarter without doing anything? In 2012, a study came along that promised both. It said that countries that ate more chocolate had more Nobel Prize winners, and the internet went nuts. ABC even ran the headline, "Can eating chocolate be the key to winning the Nobel Peace Prize?" and reported that chocolate boosted brain power. But that's not what the research said. The author made it clear that eating chocolate didn't make anyone smarter. His study just compared numbers, and did it poorly. Scientific American later tore it apart, saying it was either a joke or one of the worst papers they'd ever seen. The datasets didn't even match, and other factors were ignored. 22. Balkan boys have X-Men style superpowers. Of all of the movie universes to live in, the X-Men one would be the hardest to beat. So when 2 boys from the Balkans were reported to have Magneto-style powers, the whole world heard about it. One boy in Serbia could stick spoons and forks to his chest, and another in Croatia said he could attract metal objects and heal like Wolverine. Then reality showed up. People started pointing out the problems, like how the kids had to lean back to keep the metal in place, something a real magnetic field wouldn't need. Tests suggested their skin was just oily and sticky enough to hold lightweight objects. As for the super healing, Discover magazine explained it was nothing supernatural at all. Just young tissue doing what young tissue does, healing faster than adults. 21. Neutrinos move faster than light. In 2011, scientists thought they had broken the universe. Researchers at Italy's Opera Lab recorded neutrinos traveling from CERN in Switzerland and claimed they'd move faster than light. If that were true, Einstein's work would have gone straight into the trash. It would have meant that time travel might have been possible, and modern physics would have needed a total rewrite. But when the dust settled, the cause turned out to be nothing more than a loose fiber optic cable that had thrown off the timing. The dream of faster than light travel was over, and Einstein could rest easy. 20. Reading burns fat. A few years ago, researchers came out with what sounded like a dream study for anyone who hates cardio. They claimed that obese kids could lose weight just by reading novels. News outlets ate it up, reporting that reading could help children slim down without setting a foot in the gym. What the headlines missed, however, was the fine print. The kids weren't reading just any novel. They were handed a story about an overweight girl who loses weight and makes friends. Those who read it saw less than 1% dip in BMI, which barely registered as significant. Experts later pointed out that the weight loss probably came from the camp's diet plan, not its bedtime reading list. And the event became another example of how enthusiasm can outpace evidence. 19. Prehistoric GPS. Humans love finding patterns, even when they aren't really there. That instinct led one researcher, Tom Brooks, to announce that ancient Britons had once created their own form of GPS. He'd mapped prehistoric monuments and found they formed neat triangles across the country. Geometry, he said, that predated the Greeks by 2,000 years. Then mathematician Matt Parker put that theory to the test using the locations of Woolworth stores. The same perfect triangles appeared. The message was obvious. If you cherry pick enough points on a map, anything can look like genius. 18. The man who grew his finger back with pixie dust. Lee Spivak lost a finger in a model plane propeller incident, and doctors said it was gone for good. Weeks later, standing behind the counter of his Ohio hobby shop, he proved them wrong. His fingertip had grown back. The secret, according to him, was what he called pixie dust. In reality, it was a fine powder made from pig bladder tissue that came from the University of Pittsburgh, where scientists were studying something called extracellular matrix, a biological scaffold that encourages cells to rebuild instead of scar. Researchers hope that the technique could one day repair skin, muscle, and even organs. For now, though, Spivak's finger remains a remarkable one-off rather than proof of human limb regeneration. 17. Cockroaches can survive a nuclear apocalypse. For years, the line was that cockroaches would stroll out of a nuclear war while the rest of us vanished. Newer research says no. Roaches handle radiation better than people, but a real detonation isn't just radiation. There's heat, pressure, and doses so high they overwhelm even tough insects. Close to a blast, they die like everything else. And heavy fallout over time would finish the survivors. So no, they won't inherit the Earth after World War III. 16. Sperm Wiggle. Antony van Leeuwenhoek, the father of microbiology, was many things. Curious, inventive, and apparently not all that shy about using himself for science. In the 1670s, he took a look at his own semen through a microscope and saw what he described as little eels flicking their tails back and forth. That image stuck for over 300 years. Every textbook since has described sperm swimming that way. But modern technology has finally proved otherwise. Using high-speed 3D microscopes, researchers from the University of Bristol and Mexico's National University discovered that sperm tails don't actually move side to side. They only whip in one direction. To keep swimming straight, each sperm rolls as it moves, more like a corkscrew. The back and forth motion we've seen all this time was just an optical illusion. 15. Thinking about the elderly makes you walk slower. In 1996, psychologist John Barge made headlines with a strange claim. People who read words associated with old age, things like Florida, bingo, and wrinkles, actually walked more slowly afterward. It was one of psychology's most famous examples of priming, the idea that subtle cues could unconsciously change our behavior. But when other researchers tried to replicate it, nothing happened. And in 2012, 2 independent teams failed to reproduce the results. Later studies indicated the slowdown might have been caused by the experiments themselves, who subconsciously expected to see it happen. In 1996, psychologist John Barge made headlines with a strange claim. People who read words associated with old age, things like Florida, bingo, and wrinkles, actually walked more slowly afterward. It was one of psychology's most famous examples of priming, the idea that subtle cues could subconsciously change our behavior. But when other researchers tried to replicate it, nothing happened. And in 2012, 2 independent teams failed to reproduce the results. Later studies indicated the slowdown might have been caused by the experimenters themselves, who subconsciously expected to see it happen. 14. Cleopatra's Pearl Trick. Cleopatra once made a bet with her lover, Mark Antony, that she could spend a fortune on a single meal. The amount? 10 million sesterces, enough to build a small city. When dinner got served, she took off one of her pearl earrings, dropped it into a bowl of vinegar, and drank it. The pearl dissolved, and just like that, she won the bet. For centuries, historians firmly believed the story was nothing more than nonsense. But in 2012, scientists decided to find out. Using plain vinegar, they showed that pearls can dissolve, though it takes more than a day. Heat it up or crush it first, and the process only takes a few minutes. So with a little prep work, Cleopatra could have pulled it off in less than 10 minutes. 13. Light obeys the laws of physics. For most of modern science, light traveled in waves, carried color, and spun as it moved, something physicists called angular momentum. That spin always showed up as neat whole numbers. Then, in 2016, a research team fired laser beams through special crystals and stumbled upon something that didn't fit the mold. One beam was twisting only halfway, a half-light. The discovery forced scientists to rethink everything they knew about how light behaves. It proved there are still forms of light that don't follow the rules we thought were set in stone. And while the findings started out as a mystery, it's already showing promise in the real world. That unusual half-light could someday make fiber optic internet faster, safer, and a lot smarter than anything we've built so far. 12. You can't compare apples and oranges. Everyone knows that saying. It's our go-to way of saying two things are completely different. But a surgeon named James E. Barone decided to check if that was actually true. He presented a full scientific paper on it to the Connecticut Society of American Board Surgeons. Yeah, really. After running his tests, he found that apples and oranges aren't as different as we've always said. Aside from color and the shape of their seeds, they have nearly identical structures and chemical compositions. Nutritionally, they might as well be cousins. In other words, you can compare apples and oranges, and they're not all that far apart. 11. Splashback is inevitable. For years, men have blamed bad splashback on pressure or speed. The logic seems obvious. The faster the stream, the bigger the mess. But a group of scientists at Brigham Young University decided to put that theory to the test. In what they proudly called the Splash Lab, they 3D printed a urethra, built a custom testing rig, and ran a series of experiments to figure out what really causes that dreaded splash. After hours of filming droplets in slow motion, they found that speed doesn't matter much at all. The real culprit was angle. Pee straight down, and you're basically asking for trouble. Aim lower and the droplets lose their bounce before they hit back. It turns out, the perfect angle makes all the difference. So after years of guesswork, science finally settled it. The key to staying dry isn't force or technique, it's geometry. I know, groundbreaking. 10. Power poses. In 2010, psychologist Amy Cuddy made headlines with her study on power poses. The idea was that standing like a superhero, hands on hips, chest out, could literally boost confidence and lower stress. Her TED Talk exploded in popularity, and for a while, everyone from job seekers to CEOs was striking poses before big meetings. Other scientists tried to repeat her results, but they couldn't. The confidence boost never showed up in larger controlled studies, and it didn't take long for researchers to point out that the original work used small sample sizes and shaky statistics. Over time, power posing went from science-backed advice to a reminder that good posture won't fix bad data. 9. A baby's gender is always 50-50. Science has always said the mother's egg brings in an X chromosome, the father adds either an X or a Y, and fate flips the coin. But researchers at Newcastle University think the coin might actually be weighted. After studying nearly 1,000 family trees, they found that men with mostly brothers were more likely to have sons, and men with mostly sisters were more likely to have daughters. It looks like there may be a gene that influences how many X or Y chromosomes a man's sperm carries. Scientists haven't nailed down the exact gene yet, but it could explain why some families keep having kids of the same sex, or why baby booms after major wars produce more boys. 8. Waking a sleepwalker can kill them. Most of us have heard that you should never wake a sleepwalker, or they could die of shock. For decades, people believed it could trigger a heart attack or a full-body collapse. But sleep specialists say that's just not true. Millions of sleepwalkers wake up every year, and none have dropped dead from being startled awake. That doesn't mean it's totally safe, though. People who wake mid-sleepwalk are often confused, scared, or even defensive because their brain hasn't fully caught up yet. According to the experts, the best move isn't to yell or shake them, but to guide them gently back to bed, unless they're about to do something dangerous like wander outside or start cooking. So no, you won't kill a sleepwalker by waking them, but you might get punched for trying. 7. Humans came pre-assembled. During the 17th and 18th centuries, doctors fully believed that every person started out as a tiny, fully formed human inside a sperm or an egg. Some scientists even claim that miniature winged creatures grew in chicken embryos. It was called preformationism, and for a short time, it was taken quite seriously. Then, better microscopes came along and ruined the theory. When researchers finally got a close look, there were no tiny people hiding in cells, just the slow process of growth we now call development. The theory collapsed, and epigenesis, the idea that organisms develop gradually from a single cell rather than starting out fully formed, took its place. 6. Children inherit traits from their mother's past lovers. Can a woman's past lovers influence her future kids? Well, scientists used to say so. The theory called telegony claimed that a woman's first partner left behind some kind of biological imprint that carried over into later pregnancies. Even Aristotle believed it, which gave the myth a long and very influential life. In fact, it got so popular that British royals once refused to let future kings marry women who'd already been married, since you didn't want an heir that could inherit traits from another man. Science eventually caught up in the 19th century and proved it was nonsense. Offspring inherit only their parents' genes. However, a study in fruit flies in 2014 found a small version of it in insects. So maybe Aristotle wasn't completely off, just a few million species too high on the food chain. 5. Cavities are caused by toothworms. Yep, the idea has shown up in ancient Chinese carvings and medieval Europe, going as far back as Sumerian texts from 5000 BCE. The toothworms were believed to chew holes in enamel, hide in the gums, and cause unbearable pain. It sounded logical enough, until modern dentistry showed up. When microscopes and science got involved, no one could find a single worm. And as we all know today, the real culprit turned out to be bacteria feeding on sugars left in your mouth. 4. There's no gravity in space. That's why astronauts float around like they're underwater in slow motion, right? Not quite. Gravity's still very much there. It just works differently once you leave the surface. Astronauts aboard the International Space Station are still under Earth's gravitational influence. They're orbiting, not escaping. What looks like weightlessness is actually called microgravity. The station, the astronauts, and everything inside are all falling toward Earth at the same speed, which cancels out the feeling of weight. It's like a never-ending free fall around the planet. Gravity doesn't suddenly stop a few hundred miles up. If it did, the ISS would just drift off into space instead of orbiting us every 90 minutes. The good news is that if you ever trip in space, you won't fall down. You'll just fall forever. 3. Fear during pregnancy causes birth defects. Before genetics, people believed a mother's thoughts or experiences could physically shape her unborn baby. It was known as maternal impression, and doctors actually told pregnant women to surround themselves with beautiful things. A shock, a fright, or even looking at someone disabled was thought to mark the child. The superstition ran deep. In 1726, a British servant named Mary Toft fooled doctors into thinking she'd given birth to rabbits. They decided it must have happened because she dreamed about rabbits, ate rabbits, and spent her days chasing them. Centuries later, people said that Joseph Merrick, better known as the Elephant Man, was deformed because his mother had once been startled by an elephant. Today, we know Merrick's appearance had nothing to do with fear or dreams, only genetics. But in a world without microscopes or DNA research, people reach for the next best explanation. 2. Aliens are astro-engineering super galaxies. One of the coolest ideas to come out of the 60s was that we might actually spot alien super civilizations. Physicist Freeman Dyson suggested that as a species got more advanced, it would actually run out of energy and start collecting it straight from its own star. The way to do that, he said, was by building huge structures, later called Dyson spheres, to trap that energy. If that were real, those stars would give off a glow we could spot from across the galaxy. So, scientists actually went looking. For decades, telescopes searched the skies for anything that looked like alien engineering. In 2015, a massive study actually looked at more than 100,000 nearby galaxies and found nothing. Not a flicker out of place. If anyone out there had built an empire powered by suns, we would have seen the light by now. Some researchers think that means advanced civilizations eventually choose sustainability over expansion. Maybe the future of intelligence isn't building across galaxies, but learning to stay put. 1. Fast food can end obesity. Everyone dreams of eating whatever they want and never gaining weight. So, when The Atlantic published an article called How Junk Food Can End Obesity, people paid attention. Written by former statistics professor David H. Friedman, it argued that processed foods might actually help us stay thin. He claimed that some unprocessed foods were worse for you than processed ones, and that embracing the right kind of junk could lead to a healthier life. It sounded like the best diet news ever, but then Paul Rayburn at MIT's KSJ Tracker took the article apart piece by piece, highlighting all the cherry-picked data and shaky logic. Friedman had compared high-calorie, unprocessed foods with lighter processed snacks, while ignoring all the research showing fruits, vegetables, and whole grains are the real winners. He even ended up recommending fiber and vegetables, the very thing junk food doesn't offer. So yeah, so much for that Big Mac diet. And that's a wrap. Thank you so much for watching and interacting with me in our comment section. You guys really make it all worth it. And if you're still in the wait, what kind of mood? That's perfect. Our related video, 25 mind-blowing facts about life, space, and everything in between, is basically that feeling on repeat. That link's gonna pop up right about here. Come on, you've come this far. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all again next time.